The House of Spirits by Nancy Roberts. Each room at the Myrtles has its own resident ghost. St. Francisville, Louisiana is a charming old town, some 70 miles north of New Orleans. It is built on a narrow ridge and said to be 2 miles long and 2 yards wide. There are many beautiful plantation homes there, but the only one with eerie happenings that have reverberated throughout America is the Myrtles. The Myrtles has been featured in Life magazine, Southern Living, The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Family Circle, and many other publications. Many television networks have also done features on this house. The Myrtles is also, according to the U.S. Tourist Bureau, one of the authenticated haunted houses of America, and it has sometimes been called America's most haunted house. The Myrtles contain some of the most interesting architecture in the South. The outside of the home was built by General David Bradford in 1796. His lacy ornamental ironwork inside the large rooms with their high ceilings are graced by outstanding plaster friezes. The Myrtles is surrounded by immense oak trees dripping with Spanish moss, and beneath their shade, the house appears to be in perpetual twilight. Unlike other houses to me, the Myrtles is an entity, said one of its former owners, Francis Kierman. How did a vivacious blonde from the West Coast with hazel eyes, an attractive smile, and the voice of an engaging teenager become owner of a house like this? And what eerie experiences has she encountered? Miss Kierman shared her story. While I was on a cruise to Jamaica and Haiti and then on to Acapulco, I became friendly with a couple who talked me into skipping Acapulco and coming back to Louisiana with them. Because this is such a lovely place, and really, just for fun, I decided to look at real estate. The day I was looking was the day that the listing on the Myrtles came into the office. I later found out that a couple who lived directly behind my parents' house in San Jose had gone on the same cruise I had and had stopped in St. Francisville on their way back to Michigan. The house happened to be for sale at the time, and they bought it under almost identical circumstances. The first day in the real estate office, as we were going out to look at the house, the realtor kept calling me Sarah. Although I corrected her several times, neither of us were aware of it, but later I found that 2 Sarahs had lived here in the 1800s. When I went into the place for the first time, I heard a woman's voice calling my name. At first I thought it was the realtor, and she was outside trying the back door to be sure that it worked. After I left, I knew I would be buying that house, and I cried some that night as I realized that from now on I would be far from my family and home. As I think about everything that happened, I feel that fate, I prefer to call it God, has played an important part in the events of my life. I also think that places exert a strong pull on certain individuals, and I will always believe that this house chose me. The first week that I was there, I was sleeping in an upstairs bedroom. I left the lights on, but the switch was set to dim. After a night or two, I thought that was silly, and that I could sleep with the lights off, so I turned them off. But sometime after midnight, I woke up, and the lights were on bright. Half asleep, I thought that I must have left them on, and I turned the dimmer. The room was once more in darkness. 2 hours passed, and I was awake again. I found all the lights in the room on, bright, just as they had been 2 hours earlier. I turned the switch 360 degrees and clicked the lights off again. Later, I woke up for a third time, and the lights were on once more. That just scared me to death, and I grabbed my robe and a blanket to go downstairs and sleep in the sitting room. All went fine, and I slept peacefully until about 5 o'clock, when I woke up with a start and had the feeling that someone was looking at me. I stared up into the face of a large black lady whose head was wrapped in a green turban. She wore something that resembled a long green dress. I was so shocked that I just couldn't look at her face again. By the time I had begun screaming, but she still didn't go away. Involuntarily, I struck out with my arm to push her away from me, but as I did so, my hand passed through her and she faded away. It was a couple of days before the closing on the house, and the current owner was still there. I told her about it the next day, and she said, "Oh, that's ridiculous." But even on the first night, at about 1 o'clock, I had heard footsteps outside my door and assumed that it was one of the house guests. The next day, I learned that everyone in the house claimed to have been dead to the world before 11. Later, I found the whole town knew that the house was haunted, but they weren't going to tell an out-of-state person who was thinking of buying it. After I bought the house, I mentioned the lady in the green to the mother of the former owner, and to my surprise, she was absolutely thrilled. "Can you imagine?" she said. "Why, Francis, you've seen the Myrtle's most famous ghost." I turned the house into a bed and breakfast place, and at first I tried to keep the ghostly visitors a secret from the real ones. But during the 7 years I have been here, there have been about 100 reports each year of apparitions or some supernatural occurrence. There were times when I was truly frightened, and the only thing that kept me from going back to my parents was that it would be too embarrassing to tell them I was leaving because I was afraid of ghosts. The most common sounds are either those of children's voices at play or that of a baby crying. But the eeriest of all is the music of a dance going on downstairs. Often people think that another guest's television is on too loud, but on inquiring, they find there is no television set in the room next to them. Each room has its own unique ghost. One was a wounded Confederate soldier who appears in May and June. A pair of honeymooners stayed there. The groom went upstairs alone to lie down and woke to find a black servant standing beside the bed, bandaging his foot. The honeymooners immediately checked out. The plantation's most famous murders occurred shortly after its sale in 1817 to a philandering judge named Clark Woodruff, General Bradford's son-in-law. The judge grew angry with the slave woman named Cleo for eavesdropping, and he cut off one of her ears as a penalty. For revenge, she mixed poisonous oleander flowers into a birthday cake for the judge's oldest daughter. His 2 little girls died, as did his wife. Other slaves hanged Cleo. It is said that she still haunts the house, wearing a green turban to cover her missing ear. Cleo was evidently the ghost who had frightened Frances Kremer during her first week in the house. Janet Roberts, a psychic who is the treasurer of the Louisiana Society for Physical Phenomena, believes that the Myrtles has many ghosts. Walking into the parlor was like walking into a crowded cocktail party. I felt that we were literally bumping into people, and I wanted to say, "Excuse me," but except for the grumpy ghosts who would occasionally hurl a clock or drop a candlestick, they do no harm. As Miss Kierman says, at first I would not stay here alone at night. After I made it into a B&B in 1981, that seldom happened. But there are still a few things that rile me, and when they do, I have to go spend the night in the new wing. Asked if she ever talked with any of the apparitions, Miss Kierman shook her head. I certainly am not brave enough to try to communicate with any of them. I got used to the footsteps, the door slamming, and the voices, so now I don't keep my hand on the phone ready to dial the police as I did at first. I know this sounds absurd, but it's funny to think what you later come to accept when you didn't believe in this sort of thing at all before. About 75% of the people who come here do so because they want to hear our ghosts. The other 25% just happen upon it. Oddly enough, the ones who get scared and want to check out in the middle of the night are sometimes the big macho-type men. What sort of person is most apt to have a supernatural experience? Miss Kierman noted, it is usually the skeptic or the one who is expecting anything to happen. When people have been so eager to see a ghost and then report it, I wonder if it isn't their imagination. She continued, there have been 10 murders here at the Myrtles, and that's quite a few, even for a house that is almost 200 years old. I think some of those poor, tragic victims may have been the ghosts I have seen. I believe that this house sets off intense emotions in the people who live here for any length of time. The overseer of this plantation in 1850 was a white man, 24 years old, and he committed suicide. I later hired a young man of 24 who tried the same thing. Fortunately, he was unsuccessful. He may have been unstable from the beginning, but some people are very impressionable. I don't hire men that age anymore. I try to hire people that are happy, and I've always been a healthy, happy person myself. Most visitors who come here seem to leave content and rested. At least I think they do, for a great many return each year. At first, the ghosts terrified me. Then there was a year or two when the knowledge that they were there was just fun and games, but of late I really believe that they have led me to God. They have brought me closer to a sense of His reality and the meaning of life. Once you are confronted with a ghost, you can't brush off the existence of life after death. Now operated as a bed and breakfast, the Myrtles Plantation offers visitors the opportunity to book a room at one of America's most haunted homes. It is also open for regular tours. The end.